Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. It's amazing we have a really important topic to dig into today.
I know, right?
This is one that has major global implications.
Definitely.
We're diving into the German election and the
Yes.
recent one.
Yes.
And you guys sent him some incredible sources.
Yeah, a really diverse set.
News articles, expert analysis, even some raw social media posts just to get a feel
A
for
feel for the street.
exactly how people are reacting. So let's just jump right in.
Yeah, let's go.
We have to set the stage a little bit because we had a snap election in Germany.
Right.
Unexpected, kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah, the coalition government collapsed, so it's a bit of a surprise.
Totally. And it feels like the whole world is kind of watching this election because it does have those international implications.
Especially with who's back in the White House.
Oh, yeah, we'll definitely be talking about
The Trump factor.
the Trump factor a little bit later.
Oh, yeah.
But let's start with the big winner here.
Okay.
Friedrich Merz and his party, the CDU-CSU.
Yeah, so they took the victory. But it wasn't a super decisive win. It was still pretty significant then.
Okay, so help us understand what makes this such a big deal.
Well, think about who Merz is. He's this 69-year-old businessman,
Okay.
known for a pretty conservative stance.
Mm-hmm.
And he ran on some pretty bold promises like cracking down on immigration,
Okay.
slashing taxes, especially for businesses,
Mm-hmm.
and pushing for less regulation on businesses. And maybe the biggest thing is that he's advocating for a much more assertive foreign policy stance for Germany.
Interesting. So how would that look in practice? I mean, what are we talking about here?
Well, one of his big focuses is on Ukraine.
Okay.
And he's been pretty vocal about wanting to challenge American dominance on the world stage.
Wow.
Basically, he's aiming for a Europe that's a lot less reliant on the U.S. for defense and trade.
When you say that, I immediately think back to some of the things he said on the campaign trail about Trump's impact on democracy
Right.
and how he seemed to be kind of directly challenging Trump's vision.
Yeah, that's a really important point. It almost feels like we're watching this battle of ideologies play out.
Totally.
You've got Trump's America first on one side, and then you have Merz pushing for this more independent Europe.
Yeah.
And you can bet that that tension is going to have a ripple effect on everything from trade deals to military alliance.
Okay, so we've got Merz shaking things up on the international stage.
Yeah.
But we also need to talk about what's happening within Germany itself, because one of the biggest stories to come out of this election was the rise of the AfD.
The far-right party.
Yes, and they actually doubled their vote share.
Yeah, it was a significant jump.
So what's going on there? Why this surge in support for the far right?
It's something a lot of people are worried about, to be honest.
I can imagine.
Their platform is built on anti-immigrant sentiment. And there's also concern about some members having links to extremist ideologies, which is really sensitive in a country with Germany's history.
I was looking through the sources that you sent, and I came across some quotes from young people in Berlin.
Oh, yeah.
And it really brought this home for me. Like David, who's 22, he said he's devastated by the AfD's success. And then there's Flo, a student who talked about the campaign being filled with racist diversions. It's clear that people are really worried about what this means for Germany's future.
Yeah, it's definitely causing a lot of fear and anxiety. And what's really interesting is that the AfD didn't just appeal to older voters.
Oh, really?
They actually gained a lot of support from younger people, too, which makes you think that this isn't just a blip on the radar.
Right.
It could signal a more long-term shift in Germany's political landscape.
So we have this picture of a country at a crossroads, Merz and his conservative agenda, the rise of the AfD and all these anxieties and fears.
And don't forget the coalition conundrum.
Oh, right. The CDU-CSU won, but they didn't get enough votes to govern alone.
Exactly. They're going to have to partner up with another party. And that's where things could get really interesting.
Okay, so coalitions, what are the options and what are the challenges?
Well, the most likely scenario is that they team up with the Social Democrats, the SPD. But think about it. Their views are pretty different from Merz's vision, so there's going to have to be a lot of compromise.
Right.
And there are other possibilities, too, like the Greens, but a three-party coalition could be really fragile.
Yeah, like trying to balance on a tightrope.
Exactly.
I think one of the quotes you sent actually captures this concern really well. It was from Felix, who's a doctor. He voted for Merz's party, but he said he's worried about the potential for an unstable government. It's like voters are stuck between a rock and a hard place. They want change, but they're also scared of what that change might bring.
It's a tough spot to be in, and it really highlights the uncertainty that's hanging over Germany right now.
It definitely does. So to understand how they got to this point, we need to look at the factors that drove people to vote the way they did. It wasn't just about political ideology, right? There are real-life anxieties and frustrations that played a role.
Absolutely.
So let's break those down. What were some of the key forces at play here?
Well, the economy was a huge factor. I mean, imagine opening your grocery bill and seeing the prices skyrocketing. while your wages stay the same.
Yeah, I can see how that would be frustrating.
That's the reality for a lot of Germans right now, and it's fueled a lot of anger and resentment.
One of the quotes you sent really hit on this. It was from a woman named Rojan. She said, "Everything is getting more expensive, and at the same time, wages are not rising."
It's a perfect summary of the situation.
Yeah, it really is. And that economic anxiety is then laid on top of the ongoing debate about immigration.
Exactly. Germany's seen a large influx of refugees in recent years, and it's become this central and really divisive issue. The AfD in particular has capitalized on this.
How so?
By using inflammatory rhetoric and playing on people's fears. And we can't forget that just weeks before the election, there were those deadly attacks carried out by migrants that definitely had an impact on the political climate.
It's tragic, but it's a reminder of how real-world events can intersect with these deep-seated anxieties and really shape how people vote. It feels like there's even more to this story, though, right? Because you also mentioned something about younger voters feeling ignored by mainstream politicians.
That's a big part of it. There's this growing sense among young people that the traditional political parties just aren't listening to their concerns.
It's interesting because you'd think that a party like the AfD, with its focus on nationalism and additional values, wouldn't really appeal to younger voters.
You would think so. But that's where things get really interesting. We'll explore that generational divide a little bit later. But for now, let's shift gears and talk about the elephant in the room, the return of Trump.
Okay, let's do it. We've got this new, more assertive Germany under Merz, and we've got Trump back in the White House. What could that mean for the relationship between these two countries and for Europe as a whole?
That's a great question, and one that deserves its own deep dive.
It really does feel like we're on the verge of something big. I mean, Merz has made it clear that he wants a Europe that's less reliant on the U.S.
Yeah, he's been pretty blunt about that. Remember when he said, "My top priority is to strengthen Europe so we can gradually achieve real independence from the USA"?
Yeah, that was a pretty strong statement, especially coming from the leader of a country that's been such a close ally to the U.S. And it's not just talk, right? He's also hinted at taking concrete steps.
Oh yeah, like increasing Germany's defense spending.
Exactly, and maybe even reducing their reliance on NATO.
Which would be a huge deal if Germany starts culling back from that U.S.-led security umbrella. It could have a domino effect across the whole region.
So it's not just about military strength, though, right?
No, he's also talking about economic independence, less reliance on the U.S. for trade and technology.
It's like he's trying to build this fortress Europe, but one that's focused on economic and technological self-sufficiency.
Right, and that's where things could get really interesting because that vision clashes pretty directly with Trump's America First agenda.
Yeah, they seem completely at odds with each other.
Well, Trump sees the world as this zero-sum game. One country's win is another country's loss, and he's not afraid to use economic weapons to get what he wants.
Yeah, like those tariffs he slapped on European steel and aluminum a few years back. Remember that?
Oh yeah, that caused a lot of tension. And it wouldn't be surprising if he pulled something similar again, if he feels like Germany's challenging American dominance.
And it's not just the tariffs, right? He's also been critical of Germany's contributions to NATO, accusing them of not paying their fair share.
Right, so there are a lot of potential flashpoints here, and it'll be interesting to see how those dynamics play out with Merz in charge.
Speaking of interesting dynamics, did you see how figures like Elon Musk and J.D. Vance endorsed Merz?
Yeah, that was pretty wild. It's not every day you see American figures weighing in on a German election.
It really highlights how interconnected our world has become. Social media and the internet have blurred those national boundaries in a way we've never seen before.
For sure. Think about the influence someone like Elon Musk has. With millions of followers, he can amplify a political message across borders in an instant.
It's like he's a global influencer for politics. And it's not just about reach, it's also about credibility. When someone like Maha endorses a candidate, it gives them a certain legitimacy, especially among younger voters who maybe don't trust traditional media as much.
It's a way of cutting through the noise and saying, hey, this person is worth paying attention to.
But those endorsements weren't without controversy, right?
Oh, definitely. There was a lot of backlash. Some people accused Musk and Vance of meddling in German politics.
Right. It raised concerns about foreign influence in elections, which is a sensitive topic anywhere.
It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, those endorsements can boost a candidate's visibility. But on the other, they can also backfire if voters feel like it's foreign interference.
And speaking of social media, it seemed like it played a huge role in this election. I mean, every platform was buzzing with reactions and analysis.
Oh yeah, social media has become essential for political campaigns. It's a way to connect directly with voters, to bypass the traditional media, and to try to shape the narrative around the election.
But it's also a breeding ground for misinformation.
Definitely. It can be really hard to separate fact from fiction, especially when you're bombarded with so much information from all sides.
Right. And it's not just about the campaigns themselves. You also see individuals and influencers trying to sway public opinion, and even foreign actors getting involved.
It's like a battle for hearts and minds being fought online. with likes and shares as the weapons.
And it's something we all need to be more aware of. I mean, as voters and as citizens.
Definitely, we need to be critical of the information we see online and make sure we're getting our news from reliable sources.
Okay, so we've got these global figures weighing in a social media landscape that's both a megaphone and minefield, and a deeply divided electorate. It's a lot to take in. But I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier, the AfD's appeal to younger voters.
Right, that was one of the most surprising outcomes of this election. It challenges those assumptions we have about younger generations being more progressive.
So what's driving that trend?
Well, I think it's partly about the anxieties and uncertainties that young people are facing today. They're coming of age in a world that feels really unstable.
With climate change and economic instability.
Exactly. And the AfD, with its message of nationalism and protectionism, offers this sense of security, a return to a simpler time, even if that time never really existed.
It's like they're promising a quick fix for these really complex problems.
Right, and that can be appealing when you're feeling lost or scared. And don't forget the economic anxieties that are fueling this trend.
Young people are facing a lot of economic pressure, stagnant wages, rising housing costs. It's tough.
And the AfD taps into that by focusing on protecting German jobs and industries.
It's like offering a Band-Aid for a bullet wound.
Exactly. It might provide some temporary relief, but it doesn't address the underlying problems. And it can actually make things worse in the long run.
And that's what's so concerning about this generational divide, because if young people start embracing these kinds of ideologies, it could have a lasting impact on the political landscape.
It could shape Germany's future for decades to come.
It's definitely something we'll watch closely. So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the election results and the rise of the far right to the role of social media and the potential for a clash between Merz's vision for Europe and Trump's America First agenda.
And we've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to explore.
There is, but I think one thing is clear. We're at a pivotal moment in history. And the choices that are made now, both by individuals and by countries, are going to shape the world for years to come. So let's take a closer look at what some of those choices might be and what they could mean for Germany and for the rest of us.
You know, it's amazing while this deep dive has gone from, global headlines about Merz winning and Trump being back to these personal stories.
I know, it's wild, right?
About people, dealing with rising costs and feeling like no one's listening to them.
It really is like a reminder that even these huge global events, they're all connected to these individual choices and experiences.
Exactly. And those experiences are often shaped by, forces that are way bigger than any single person.
Oh, absolutely.
Or even any one country.
Think about how interconnected the world is now.
Totally. I mean, economically, technologically, even socially.
The things that happen in Berlin or Washington or Beijing.
It all has these ripple effects that can be felt all over the planet.
It's like we're all part of this giant web, each thread connected to the next. And if one little part vibrates,
the whole thing feels it.
Exact. And that's what makes this moment in history so fascinating, but also kind of scary.
Yeah, for sure.
Because we're seeing these massive shifts happening. The rise of China, the return of nationalism.
All this populism.
And then technology just changing everything so fast.
It's creating a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. And not just in Germany, it's everywhere.
So if we zoom out for a sec.
Okay.
We've got this new assertive Germany under Merz, a far-right party gaining ground, and Trump back in the White House, plus all those other global forces at play.
Right.
Where does Germany fit into all of this? What's their role going to be in the next few years?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
And no one really knows the answer.
Yeah.
But, we can think about some possible scenarios.
Okay.
On one hand, we might see Germany becoming more inward-looking.
Okay.
Focused on protecting their own interests. And less interested in being a leader on the global stage.
Kind of like retreating into that Fortress Europe idea we were talking about.
Exactly. And, that could have big consequences for international cooperation, climate change, global trade, all that stuff.
I see what you mean.
But on the other hand,
okay,
we could see Germany stepping up even more.
Okay.
Becoming a stronger voice for working together, for a more stable world order and a more fair global economy.
So it's like Germany is at a crossroads.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
And whichever path they choose is going to have huge effects, not just on them, but on everybody.
Totally.
And it feels like those anxieties we were talking about, the ones that fueled the AfD's rise, could push Germany in either direction.
That's a really good point. Because fear is a powerful motivator. It can make people withdraw from the world, but it can also inspire them to try and fix things.
I get it.
And that's where the younger generation comes in.
You're right.
Because they're the ones who will inherit this world.
Yeah.
They're the ones who will have to figure out a way forward.
We talked a lot about the AfD and how they appeal to young people, but a lot of young people voted against them too.
That's true.
They want a different kind of future. Imagine if all those young people, the ones fighting for climate action, for social justice, could channel that energy into something positive.
It would be incredible to see them become this powerful force for change.
It really would. So, to wrap things up, I think it's clear that the future is uncertain. But it's also full of possibilities, and the choices we make today, both as individuals and as nations, will determine what that future looks like.
That's why it's so important to stay informed and engaged.
To keep asking those tough questions.
Exactly. Because the more we understand what's happening in the world, the better we'll be able to deal with the challenges and opportunities that come our way.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.